Thank you, Jenny. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay. There's a strategy in the military called dispersal, and a few of you might know what it is. It means you spread your resources out thinly, so if you get attacked, you don't all get destroyed. And it's wonderful to see everybody dispersed here so nicely tonight. Tonight I'm going to talk about the Chidlow Army Camps, the history of the camps, and what we found at the camps. And I also want to talk about the struggle that is heritage in Western Australia and in Mundaring Shire. So at the outbreak of World War II, with the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, the West Australian was in a very, very bad situation. It really had no troops. All of our experienced regular soldiers, or most of them were fighting in the Middle East with Great Britain. And the only other experienced troops were ones in garrison duty. There was only a few thousand troops in WA. Now, there was some concern for a start that perhaps West Australia would be abandoned and that only the eastern states would be defended. But the commanders suggested that West Australia and the Perth region, especially the southwest of WA, was of strategic importance. And it became important because of its resources, possibly also because it was where John Curtin, his seat in Parliament, came from. And also it became a major base for American and Dutch submarines at Fremantle. So on the 20th of December 1941, the Western Command issued an Operation Instruction Number 7 detailing the probable course of the Japanese. And this is what they considered could happen. There could be a dispatch of naval forces to Australian waters for the purpose of attacking commerce and bombarding coastal cities and defence works, including the laying of mines and all other methods of destruction. The dispatch of expeditionary forces under naval escort to attack bases for the purpose of denying them to our forces and or seizing them for use by themselves for sea, land and air operations. And then number 6 was the invasion of Australia with a definite purpose of conquest. But in view of the fact that the fate of all countries are bound up with any peace terms that may be decided in the conclusion of the war, this is not considered a likely Japanese action in the initial stages. And in the early stages, it will be difficult to distinguish this from the other courses of action the Japanese might take. It was a serious situation. Now, why have I got a picture of Yamato, Japan's biggest battleship? There was another one called the Musahei, and these battleships carried 9 18-inch naval guns. So that's 18-inch with a shell that big. So it weighed about half a tonne, and they had a range of 42 kilometres. If you were in Darlington and the Yamato sat out in gauge roads, you were under threat. But at Chidlow you weren't. So these issues of defence, naval bombardment were taken seriously. So Chidlow was an ideal location for that reason and for a number of other reasons as well. There was cover, so the troops that could camp at Chidlow could camp under cover, under tree cover, so they couldn't be observed from the air. Chidlow was also a good spot because it was too far from Perth for people to go out and walk into town and party and go absent without leave. It was next to the major railway line from the east-west, so it was a good communication point. And it also had the Mundaring to Kalgoorlie pipeline. So the government decided that let's build a camp at Chidlow. And this is what Chidlow looked like around about 1942. So this is from an Ordnance military map from 1942. So if you look at the roads, B1, C2, B2, these are all descriptions of the capability of those roads to handle traffic. So the military decided that Chidlow is an excellent spot. If you have a look at the date of this order, so it's 18th of the 3rd, 1942, and you'll have a look up the top, it says, Western Command requested urgent completion of service buildings for Part Camp Chidlow for 5,000 men due here at the end of the month. This is on the 18th, so they had 12 days to build a camp for 5,000 men. A fairly tricky feat, one would think. So this is the handwritten instructions of what the Chidlow's camps would consist of. If you have a look there, there's 7 camps for 600 men, 3 camps of 300 men. So there you have 5,000 men, virtually, with 93 buildings spread through the bush, mainly to the east of Chidlow. And this is from one of the archives of the location of the Chidlow camps. So you can see this is Camp 4. This is up here is Forge Road. That's the old Northern Road and the pipeline and the railway line, Lake Leschenaltia over here. So the Chidlow camps were to be constructed in this area here. These are the original blueprints for the construction of the camp. They're a little bit difficult to read, but this is Chidlow's Wells here, Liberton Road, Old Northern Road and the pipeline. And this is the Royal Australian Artillery Camp, it was known as, and there was other camps up here on the main road. Just here before you get to Liberton Road, there was a checkpoint was established there with a boom gate, I believe, with soldiers. Any vehicle that came up from Perth had to stop there. And this camp here was linked to the other camps by a rope bridge that actually went over the top of the Old Northern Road, which was still there in the late 50s. So people could climb up the ladder, go across the road without interfering with the traffic that was running up through here. So these are the southern camps. And these are the northern camps. So again, Old Northern Road, and this is running up Forge Drive, and there's these battalion camps. Now, a battalion's about 1,000 men, and this would be a fairly accurate map, and it actually shows things like the salvage tanks for the wastewater, locations of latrines, locations of headquarters, whatever. So the evidence of that still exists, and that's within the Warraloo Regional Park. So what was conditions like? Fortunately, we have a wonderful letter from Ray Flavelle, who was with the 1432nd Battalion. And let me read a bit of his story. And I'll just put a picture up there of some of his mates that were in that battalion. And if you look at them, they're all about 18, 19, 20 years old. They're only just young kids, really. And this is what met them when they arrived at Chidlow. I joined the Army in Melbourne in 1941, December, and I did my infantry training at Mount Martha in the 2nd Brigade Training Battalion with many of the other chaps. And then I transferred to the 14th Infantry Battalion as reinforcements. After we were brought up to full strength, approximately 1,000 men, we were sent in haste to WA by troop train. The journey in those days took just 6 days. Our battalion left Melbourne on the 24th of March 1942 and arrived in Chidlow on the 29th or 30th of March 1942. The train was packed full of troops in cramped conditions, and after the long and slow journey, we were glad to arrive where we did. We had no idea of where we were, only in some place called Chidlow in WA. There was no station or siding. The train was stopped in a thick copse of trees, no homes or buildings in sight. All troops were disembarked from the train. All the equipment and our gear was unloaded on the side of the track. This done, the train pulled away. We were formed up into our platoons, companies, etc. We marched a little way into the bush. The order was then given that we were prepared to set up our own campsite as best we could. From this almost virgin land, and I'm almost certain that we must have been the first troops in this Chidlow area. We made camp the best we could. However, we were not there very long as we were hurried up north to Geraldton, where we joined 2 other battalions, and we were allocated various defensive positions in and around Geraldton. These areas included Mullawar, Minganoo, Irwin River, Strawberry Hill, Perenjori, Three Springs, Dongara, Granith Mora, and eventually we returned to Bellevue, and then we went to New Guinea. So it was fairly primitive conditions, and I did a little bit of research in relation to the 1432nd Battalion, just to try and get a bit of an idea of what they were up against in Chidlow when they arrived. And the first thing they did was dig slit trenches and weapons and ammunition pits and established anti-aircraft defences in readiness for a possible air attack. So you've got 1,000 men. You've got 1,000 men who had 2 men to an air raid trench. So you have 500 trenches, air raid trenches. Every man of that battalion had to have somewhere he could go and jump in if they were attacked from the air. So you've got 500 trenches in their camp. The anti-aircraft posts were ordered to stand to at sunrise and sunset. Soldiers were informed, you are in the front line and are liable to attack by aircraft at any time. Tents and vehicles were camouflaged, with the soldiers being instructed not to use the natural vegetation within the camp for any purpose. They actually had a gong. Each company had a gong to warn troops of any impending air raid. The troops were forbidden from using sawn timber that was located around the camp, and training began with musketry, sniping, live grenade throwing, and they established a rifle range and a bayonet course. And commando platoons began to reconnaissance around Midland, New Norcia, Moora, Pywanning and other places in the area. The troops were granted a couple of days leave per month, and they'd like to go into Perth, but the platoon leaders were instructed the troops in the need for security. The head of the battalion said, "It is no idle talk to say that we have fifth columnists in this country. It has been proved that this is so." And he said to the troops, "At a holding place on the journey to our present location, troops were approached by a most attractive young female and asked for autographs. Some troops included unit names on the request from the aforesaid attractive young female. What if this woman had been an enemy agent?" Pickets were established at the Chidlow railway station, and troops were forbidden from posting letters in the Chidlow post office. There was a canteen established, and each soldier had 2 beer tickets per day. They had their own cookhouses, and they burnt, bashed and buried their rubbish. They were permitted bathing parades at Lake Leschenaultia, as long as they wore decent costumes. By the 19th of April, the unit began packing up. Stores were returned to the Chidlow camp quartermaster, and troops on the move carried their own kit, were issued with 3 days' dry rations and 50 rounds of small arms ammunition. All guns were to be readied for immediate action, and both the truck convoy and the train convoy that they headed north included anti-aircraft protection. The unit travelled to Moora, Minginoo, Dongra and Jordan. It was very serious. I think a lot of people consider that there wasn't a threat of invasion, but invasion was a consideration. There's 2,000 men at Chidlow, 1943, saluting Lieutenant General Gordon Bennett. It's a lot of men in the bush at Chidlow. And this is the same infantry battalion doing a march past Gordon Bennett on the same day. And the 6th Battalion roll call at Chidlow. Now, unfortunately, when you look into military history records, it's really related to officers. And the diaries that you read are fairly sombre and fairly cold things. You know, so such and such gets killed today. You know, there's not a lot of emotion in it. And when you look at lists of personnel, the officers are always listed, but you're struggling to find individual lists of individual soldiers. They were just the grunts, and it was all about the officers. And when you look at the National Archives photographs of Chidlow, you're battling to find images of soldiers and soldiers' lives. They're all related to the officers, and you know, guys like Bennett and the other officers have visited the camp. So how delighted was I when Les Schenberg emailed me out of the blue and said, "Oh, Bob, I saw you were interested in the Chidlow WWII Army Camps." I visited the Chidlow WWII Army Camp when my dad was there during World War II. Oops. And that's Les there. So that's Les, that's his dad, Arthur Schenberg, and that's his mum and his older sister, brother, and I think his younger brother. We don't know who the others are, but Les can remember catching the train from Perth and getting off at the Chidlow railway station and walking into the bush and going to a camp where his dad was camped. Now this is This is like one of the only photos I've seen of a Chidlow tent, for example. You know, you see where the officers lived, but these soldiers lived 8 men to a tent, and they slept on palliases, which were bags full of straw, and 8 of them in one of those. So fairly primitive conditions. And there's a number of these photos in the collection, which you can see when the exhibition opens at the Mundaring Museum. And that's another one, absolute cracker. That's Arthur there. He was actually an older guy. He probably would have been in his 30s, I think, whereas these guys are really young. So they've got a few beers. They're due to have a good time. So I'm sort of interested in what's the lives of the individual soldiers like, and you can't get that information. You know, most of them are dead. The reports don't really tell you. So I was absolutely delighted when you had the opportunity to carry out some salvage archaeology at Chidlow Camp 4. Now, I'll go into details a bit about what's happening there later, but with the permission of the developers at the subdivision at Camp 4, we were allowed to carry out an Archaeo metal detection survey, and this with a team of volunteers. We collected as many metal objects as we could for donation to the Mundaring Historical Society. And what we did is we tracked them. So this is the subdivision, and each one of these flags is a metal target. This is my GPS, and some of these other gaps would be filled by other GPSs that other volunteers were using. So we've actually covered the whole ground. And I'd like to share with you some of the things that we've found. These are gorgeous. So we've got the Rising Sun badge up there. There's quite a few of those have been found. Camp 4 is the Royal Australian Artillery Camp. So this is a artillery officer's badge. This is a signalman's badge, lightning bolt with a hand, a machine gunner's badge. Beautiful artefacts. But the most exciting thing we think, and when I talk about the Friends of the Chidlow WWII Camps, these are the volunteers that are doing this work that are actually donating the things that they find to the collection, because I believe that this collection will grow into probably one of the most important World War II artefact reference collections in Australia, because we're doing this work, and this is all voluntary. So these are World War II identity discs. Fantastic. So what they've got on them is the name, so Pengali, VX, so this guy's a Victorian, and then he's a Presbyterian. This guy over here is a Methodist, Robertson, whatever. So once you have one of these badges or these ID discs which were accidentally lost, and you have the reference number and the service number, you can actually go into the National Archives and you can find there who owned these and their details, their service record, if they've been digitised. And then you can do something even better. You can actually find the family. And that's just really, really good fun, because look at this. So these are 3 of those previous ID discs, the photos of the actual soldiers that had those ID discs. And they've lost them at the shower block, or they've fallen off their pack or whatever. And these are photos that families have sent us. So with help from Nicole Edwards up in Geraldton, who researches family histories, we've been able to track down the families of the owners of the identity discs. Now, sometimes it doesn't work because, can you imagine I'm ringing somebody in Queensland and say, hi, guess what? My name's Bob Sheppard. I'm in WA, and I'm been up at the Chidlow Army Camp, and guess what? We found your great-grandfather's or your grandfather's World War II identity disc. Click. People just don't believe you. And quite often it's very difficult to get an email address or a mail address where to send it. But once you take a photo of it and send it to them, people are just amazed. And sometimes they donate them to the collection. Sometimes they want it to stay where it is. So this is Reese Hall here, and this is the Clark family. And we discovered this lady's father's identity disc up at Chidlow, and Reese found it and donated it to the family. So we took the family up there, we showed them where the disc was found, and we gave them a guided tour of the camp. And we said, look, this is where your father had his meals. This is where your father's had his shower. This is the parade ground. This is where his tent would have been. And that's just a fantastic thing to be able to do to people. And you make friends like that. People are just... And look at this wonderful find here, Jack Hall. I mean, he was metal detecting. This is Reese's son. And he found this World War I mother's badge. Now, these were issued to mothers or wives of men who were away on service in World War I. And you get the badge, and then if you've got other members of the family, you get a bar. And on the back of each bar is the service number or the number of the badge which you can link to the family. So this lady here actually had a husband there and 2 sons fighting in World War I in France. Now, they all survived, although one was actually wounded by a young French lady and ended up in hospital with a few problems. But they did eventually make it all back into Australia. Now, we haven't finally tracked down the family yet. And this is being a World War I badge. We don't actually think it's related to the World War I, because actually what we found with it were some precious items, some brooches and whatever, and I actually think it's been stolen. And the lady who owned this badge, her nurse actually lived in Mundaring, and I've got a feeling that this has been stolen from the nurse's house and probably buried up in amongst the camps by one of the soldiers, but we're still working that out. But that is super rare. I mean, that is just amazing. That's in the collection. That's in the Mundaring collection. That's been donated. And that's generosity. If you look at these, this is a trench art. So trench art is where you make something out of something military. So if you look up the top there, I mean, we found this one, which is a butter knife, cheese knife, whatever. It's got an engraving on it, silver, very nice. And then up here, one of the soldiers has made a replica out of it, the same shape, using a .303 bullet, and then cut the slit down there and soldered it. Maybe a dozen of these in different shapes and different formats, and some of them are half finished, some of them are not. And this is kind of cool. This is one of the things I found. I found this .303 bullet. It had a bit of wood stuck down the end of it, and I thought, what the heck's that? And it's actually a pencil. Now, if you go back to the war diaries and read the war diaries, there was a shortage of pencil. And the officers were saying, hey, just be careful, we don't have enough pencils, and make sure you use them right down to the very last inch. So when they got to that point where they couldn't actually hold the pencil, they put the pencil in a .303 bullet and crimped it over so they could get an extra half an inch out of the pencil. And there's been a few of those found, but we didn't understand what they were. So you're not going to find this stuff in the records. How about that one? Hey, isn't that a cracker? Somebody's lost their false teeth. That's a plate. World War II bridge, found out lying on the top of the ground. Now, this was interesting because Reese Hall found this, and he rang me up late one evening, and he'd been out metal detecting. He said, oh, Bob, I found human remains, what do I do? I said, mate, ring the police. You can't muck around with this sort of stuff, you ring the police. So he rang the police, and at 1:30 in the morning up in Chidlow, the police cruise up to his front door with the lights flashing, and of course all the neighbours looking out the window and saying what's going on at the Hall's property, and took this away and analysed it and said, no, it's not human remains, it's a denture. So it's come back into the collection. But we are going to get some forensic dentists to actually have a look at this, and we might be able to even work out who lost it. Maybe they had a bluey. You always hear that, I'll punch his teeth out or whatever. Maybe there was something happened. But yeah, but those sort of things are they provide a lot of information. This is Reese here, and that's the 2IC. That's the sign at Camp 3 pointing to where the second in command's office was. Look at it, beautiful. Still original colour, blue, red, just as he found it. And it actually came out of a bottle dump, and somebody had dug it out and chucked it on the ground and walked away, and he found about 6 of them. Now, for future reference, how good is that? If there's ever an interpretation, we can actually replicate that, replicate the colours, replicate the shape, and say this is what the signs were. I mean, amazing finds. Wanda the World Girl. Now this on the left-hand side was dug from underneath the ground about 6 or 8 inches. And it survived, the colour newspaper has survived from World War II. Wanda the War Girl. So, and if you go to Trove and you have a look at the newspapers, the one on the right-hand side is a black and white copy of one out of a Sunday Times in Western Australia around the same time. So we could actually go back through all the newspapers and find out what date this was. But this is Dinky Died Genuine, 1942, Wanda the War Girl panel that survived. And sometimes things survive because of strange reasons, and it could be because the paper was buried with copper. There might have been some bullets or something like that, and copper has this effect of actually preserving things. You know, most things like that would just disappear really quickly, but this one has survived. Top left-hand corner. That is actually a cap that goes over the back of a 3-inch artillery round. So the little dot up the top here actually protects the primer. So if you look at it, it's like a centerfire bullet. You don't want to bump the primer because if it'll go off, it'll just blow everything up. So they actually had a clip that clipped over the back to protect the primer. So this is in the Royal Australian Artillery Camp. There you go, 1/2 inch on a dry brush is enough. Toothpaste. These down here are World War II bag seals for post office. And these were still used in the post office up into the 1950s. So they're the seals that are clipped on them. This beautiful St John's ambulance badge. There you go. So at Camp 4 we've collected 800 artefacts. Now Camp 4 is probably about, the area we've searched is probably about 5%. So if you multiply that by the 10 camps, you're probably looking at those camps would hold maybe, I would estimate maybe 100,000 artefacts yet to be found. I mean, it's a huge archaeological resource. It really is. This is amazing. Look at that collection. That will all end up in the Mundaring and Hills Historical Society. A lot of this will be on display at the museum when the exhibition opens. Okay. This is sort of the sad end of it, really. Most people would be familiar with this photo. I mean, it's been looked upon this year as one of the great heritage tragedies. This is Rio Tinto blowing up a sacred site or an important Indigenous heritage site. Why am I associating it with what's happened at Chidlow? Well, heritage is what we have from the past we want to preserve from the future. Now, if you look at what Rio did in relation to this, did they break the law? Based on the information that I've got in relation to Section 28, permission to demolish an Aboriginal site, whatever, they didn't break any laws. Did they do the wrong thing? Perhaps. There's Chidlow Army Camp 4, 1942 officers' mess, built 1942. That's it today. Now the developers have kindly given us permission to go into Camp 4, where this site is, and do whatever we want to do to collect artefacts. In this site, and that's the original pad up there, an aerial drone photo that we took back in 2019, and that's the site as it is today. Have the developers broken any laws? The information that's been provided to me, no, they haven't. Have they done the wrong thing? So in 2018, Reece Hall rang me up and said, Bob, do you want to come up to the Chidlow Army Camp? And I'd heard about it because my father was based at Chidlow, or passed through Chidlow in World War II. So I had a link to it and I said, yeah, I'd love to go up and have a look. So he lives in this area here, and he said, oh Bob, this area here is being subdivided and developed into a big heap of blocks. So that's the subdivision. So this is LSP 69, which has been approved by the WA Planning Commission and the Shire of Mundaring Planning Department. And he said, but Bob, there's lots of army camp material there. I said, I'll come up and have a look. So what I did is I got a copy of the details of the approval process, and it says the reserve land to the east of the LSP area was used as an army camp during World War I. World War II, sorry, there is evidence that some of the activities of the camp extended onto lots 382, 289. 2 old building pads, storeroom and shower, are located on 289, and 2 broken up pads are visible on lot 382. Yeah, it doesn't look like there's a lot there. 2 old building pads and 2 broken up pads, that's 4 pads within the subdivision. No, nothing to get excited about. Now, I'd recently done an archaeological investigation up at North Head Radar Station for the Shire of Dandaragan. And I went out, because part of the subdivision was actually the Betty Street Reserve. So I went out and had a look and did just a survey as a volunteer with a few friends. We did transects, and this is what we located within this area. And this area here was within the Betty Street Reserve, and I thought, oh, that's fine, that's protected, that's public reserve. And these are the sorts of things that you can find at the Chidlow Army Camp. Perhaps some sort of fortification. This is Jared Barry digging out an old slit trench in the subdivision area, rescuing what we can. A World War II artefact. So that would have been a World War II trench, and when the guys left the camp, they chuck all the rubbish down in the air raid trench, shelter, and cover it all over, rather than dig a new hole, and that was accepted practice. So he's digging out a World War II trench and picking his way through whatever we can salvage for the collection. And these are part of the drains. These drains here, this one here, there's probably 30 kilometres of drains that run through the camps. There's another one running there into a link that runs down to a salvage pit. And these are just a marvel of emergency engineering, if you like. These are salvage drains that are made out of concrete, about that size, and it carries all the water off the buildings and all the grey water. It doesn't carry the toilets and latrines are set up differently, but all the stuff out of the laundries all ran down that drain. So what I did is, this is the area subject to the subdivision. So I got whatever plans I could find, and I started to plot all the different parts of the camp that I could. And the ones that are in black are ones that exist. So this is Betty Street Reserve here, and this is part of Betty Street Reserve. This is a subdivision. So instead of there being maybe 4, there was certainly a lot more there. And around that time, back in 2016, Frank Albums actually put a petition to Parliament trying to stop the subdivision from going ahead, because he said here, it is rich in historical environmental value, World War II Army campsites, Aboriginal sacred trees, etc. And he tried to stop. What happened was the sale of the part of the Betty Street Reserve to the developers. So, you know, generally when there's a reserve, you think a public open space is public land, this is a reserve, this is A class, B class, whatever. It's safe. It's there for the people. It's not. Somebody can sell that to a developer. It gets traded. Now, when you sell public land, pass it on, you actually have to do due diligence, which just means you have to do like a heritage survey and check out if there's any heritage value. So this is there. Identify and assess heritage value of a government property under consideration for disposal and to provide relevant protection where appropriate. So I went, okay, I'd like to see how they did their due diligence. So I wrote to the Office of State Heritage and the WA Planning Commission. I said, can you please provide me with the evidence of your due diligence in relation to the disposal of the Betty Street Reserve? There was nothing there. There's nothing there. And this is the reason why. Because it's not, the Chidlow Army Camps are not on the Municipal Heritage Inventory in Mundaring. Only sites that are identified in the inventory can the Shire impose any requirements, and that was not the case. So the Chidlow, World War II Army Camps at Chidlow are not in the Municipal Inventory. That is the primary method of protecting heritage sites in the Shire of Mundaring. There's the inventory. Is everybody aware of the inventory, that this is it? Now, anybody can nominate to the inventory, and you can add to the inventory. The Shire can add to it. It's now called the Local Heritage Survey. They can add to it easily, make individual additions. So it's not rocket science to add the significant Chidlow World War II Army Camps to the inventory. but I've been trying for 2 years and I get stymied by the planning department every time. Now, the Shire of Mundaring has been part of and commissioned 2 major reports about Chidlow, 2011 and 2012. And in both these reports, it praises the importance of the Chidlow camps to the heritage of the Chidlow and Mundaring area. And in one of those reports, it makes recommendations that they should be included in the municipal inventory. 8 years later, it still isn't. In November 2019, Jessica Shaw took some interest in this, and David Templeman got up in Parliament and in Hansard, he called me a heritage warrior and said to the Shire of Mundaring, get it on the list. And what he was saying was, get it on the municipal inventory. November 2019, and still the Shire refuses to put it on the list. So what could I do? I decided to nominate it to the Office of State Heritage, the Heritage Council. The only way to protect a heritage site in Western Australia and give it guaranteed protection is to have it listed on the state register. If you list it on the municipal inventory, planners have to take it into consideration when they do development work, but they don't have to, it's just like a gentleman's agreement. They have to consider it, but they don't have to do anything about it. Once it goes on the register, nobody can touch it without doing some serious consideration. So I nominated, with the help of the Friends of the Chidlow Camp, the remaining section of the Betty Street Reserve. This is the section here that was disposed of and given to the developer. This is the developer, plus all this area here. 3 months later, that was the answer. The council determined that a full heritage assessment was not warranted as it was unlikely that the camp should meet the threshold for entry on the State Register of Heritage Places. The spokesperson said, entry to the register is reserved for places of state cultural heritage significance. I actually think I agree with the last line, because it's actually not a place of state cultural heritage, it's a place of national heritage significance. It is possibly the biggest army camp in World War II. It had 60,000 troops that passed through it over a period of 3 to 4 years. And if you spread that out, there'd be people in this room who had relatives that went to Chidlow. Now, if you think about that, there's hundreds of thousands of Australians who have a direct link to the Chidlow Army Camps. I do, and lots of you would as well. This is just an amazing heritage archaeological resource that's sitting in the bush at Chidlow, which is in danger of disappearing. So how do we deal with that? So the lessons learned from the Chidlow experience for me are, do not assume there is any organisation looking after your heritage, because there isn't. There isn't. If it's not on a list, heritage does not exist. Now, if you deal with Indigenous Australian heritage, there is an assumption that heritage exists until the heritage is cleared. So if you're a mining company and you want to do development in the mining industry, you have to do an Aboriginal heritage survey prior to the development going ahead and the area is cleared. If you find a site on it, an Aboriginal site, you have to apply for a Section 18 determination, which means you can destroy that site. The same thing does not exist for non-Indigenous Australian heritage. The only things that are protected in this state are those which are on the Office of State register or partially protected by the municipal inventory. And I think it's a disgrace that the Shire of Mundaring hasn't included the Chidlow Army Camps. Now, why? Why haven't they included it? I mean, I don't know whether it's obvious to you. It's very obvious to me when I walk around there. I just go, why isn't this protected? It's quite simple. It's in the Woolloomooloo Park Reserve. It's not on private land. Why wouldn't you want to do it? Now, you get stymied because it's to do with planning approvals. And what you can't have is the policeman looking into the police. You can't have politicians voting on how much money they make. You can't have planning departments making decisions on heritage. And yet they do. And if you go to the WA Planning Commission, the WA Planning Commission and the Office of State Heritage are in the same office with the same minister. And it's wrong. You have to make these decisions independently of planning. They have to be absolutely independent. My concern is that developers within the Shire of Mundaring have got their eyes on additional areas within the WWII Park, and just because it's park, it's not protected, and that's a concern. The Shire will not list it. So, this is what we need to achieve. That area there, the WWII Regional Park, which contains all the army camps up there. This is where the rope bridge was. This is the remains of the Betty Street Reserve. Half of the camp is gone now. That whole area there should be included in the Mundaring Local Heritage Survey, the municipal inventory. Then it should be nominated for registration with the Office of State Heritage, and it should become the Chidlow WWII Army Camps Heritage Precinct. You have an asset in this community that could last for generations. Is anybody going to go to Anzac, into Gallipoli next year? Will anyone go to Long Tan? Is anybody going to go to Kokoda? We have world important, Australia importance heritage, military heritage site at Chidlow, and we should be thinking about looking after that for our future, for the future generations. There are two men that I know, Alec Newby, who was actually a mate of my dad's in World War II, who's 100 years old, and Dick Garrett, 95. They have memories of the Chidlow Army Camps. Now, Australia-wide, there's probably 200 or 300. There's very, very few. But, you know, they're all in their hundreds now. So, you know, I've interviewed these guys. We need to talk to them. This is all voluntary, to try and get their stories for the future. What happened to the Chidlow Army Camp? Well, there's a disposal notice sold by Gregson's Auctioneers, and up here it says something about the sale of 100 buildings and 11, etc., etc. So where did all the buildings go? Well, there's one. Manalina Butcher Shop, opposite the old Manalina Post Office. That was one of the Chidlow Army Camp huts that was sold in auction after the war. And we've got another gentleman here with us tonight who thinks he has one of the Nissen huts on his property, and I can't wait to go and have a look at it. So there you go. You can drive through Manalina and see what one of the huts looked like. You know, really all that remains now is the drain systems, the concrete pads, all the artefacts, the hundreds of thousands of artefacts, all those tracks and camps and air raid shelters, all those things that if you walk through the bush you can see, that we should be able to explore, the community should be able to explore for years. This is an asset to the Chidlow community. Thanks to the Friends of the Chidlow WWII Camps, all those people in the community who have helped and continue to help. That's standing on one of the blocks at the Chidlow WWII Camps, which still survives because it's in the Betty Street Reserve, but you never know.
And that's John Dawes standing at the back, our Shire person.
Yes, he was along. That was a... That's right, we did a guided tour. There's just a few of the books that I've published recently which are for sale over there if anybody's interested. Come and have a chat. But I really would like to give you the opportunity to ask me some questions. And look, I do apologise for the heaviness of some of this. I mean, but I'm passionate about it, and this is serious, and this community needs to get serious about this issue. You know, I've been on this case for 2 years, and I have sent numerous letters to the planning department asking them to be included in the Heritage Survey Municipal Inventory, and I just kept getting fobbed off. Oh, another 6 months, Bob, or down the track or whatever. Yes.
So the people who bought on the corner of Forge Drive and Old Northern Road,
yeah,
where that bridge used to be,
yeah,
why was that allowed to be demolished?
Don't know. Now, you know, there is an issue in relation to private property. So there's 4 camps which are on public reserve, and there's another 6 camps which are in private property. I believe that if somebody's got evidence of a World War II camp on their property, I'm not going to nominate it for the municipal inventory, or I'm not going to nominate to the Office of State Heritage. I take the view that if they ring me up and say, Bob, we've got what we think is the remains of a campsite, can you come out and have a look at it? I'll come out, I'll tell them what it is. And I think most people will actually look after it. They'll say, wow, how lucky are we? We've got, this is where Gordon Bennett had tea. You know, whatever. I think people are mature enough to take an interest, because there is a fear. You know, if you watch all this TV programs from the United Kingdom where, you know, it's heritage listed, we can't change the angle of the balustrade or whatever. You know, people are scared that if you've got a heritage listed place on your property, then you won't be able to do things. I think camps 1, 2, 3 and 4, Woolloomooloo Park is enough. I mean, that's probably 50% of the camps. And that's not going to upset any private landholder, and it should be reserved. Other questions? Please, yes.
I just want to say, through my experience with Midland District Historical Society, we nominated in Midland Tui's Gardens and the Midland Railway Company where the first sod was turned for the Midland to Walkaway line. Now, I've come up with a theory that the State Heritage Office is basically made up of architects. They don't look into social or cultural history, and they just worry about architectural features. And that's why there's a lot of for Tui's Gardens in Midland and for this, because the architects have seen it and said, oh, we've got no significance here. You know, there's no architectural features there.
Yeah.
So it doesn't mean nothing. You know, that's because the office, the people on the board of the Heritage State Heritage Office, yeah, they're all architects. You know, when it should be at least half. You know.
Yeah, look, I think you're right, and I applaud the wonderful job that you're doing down in Midland. It's just fantastic. Look, I'm a bit different. I'm a time traveller. I'm an archaeologist. I can walk through the bush, and I don't just see. I don't just see trees and rocks. I see structures. I see remnants. I imagine what it was like there in 1942. I consider that, and I consider these things. I think you can have a thing called sacred space. You can have an area that doesn't have wonderful structures in it, but still contains enough of the elements to make it real. I think that's important. More questions, please. I really like questions. It gives me an opportunity.
The old cars that are up in Betty Street Reserve, are they anything to do with the camps, or have they just been dumped?
No, dumped.
They've just
Yeah.
been dumped, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
It's just that they're that era.
Yeah.
They're that age, and I just didn't know if that had anything to do. Okay.
Yep.
Bob, how was the camps supplied? Was there an airstrip?
Well, we think there must. Well, it would have been supplied by train for sure, up and down. But we think there is an airstrip out there, and there's an assault course. I found the plans for the assault course. Barbed wire and climbing up over bridges and rope work and being shot at, and grenade course. And there's a rifle range out there as well that hasn't been explored. Most of a lot of that's been cultivated, under farms and whatever. So there's all that yet to be found. I mean, there's a lifetime of work up there. What we need to be aiming for is you have like an interpretation centre and you have guides. So people come over from Victoria and say, where was Dad? And what battalion? I was in the 6th Battalion. Yeah, come on, I'll take you out, show you. See that there? That's where Dad was. Your dad was. Whatever. And we have the ability to do that. And you actually have the ability to actually create something special for Chidlow. I sort of feel as though Chidlow might lack something, and yet with, you can actually build an identity. Welcome to Chidlow WWII Army Camp Town, the biggest camp in Western Australia, the biggest camp in Australia. And you've got signs going everywhere. You can have World War II themes in the hotel. That's my vision.
Just on that, an example of that is over in Cowra, where the POW camp was. That's very well maintained and preserved there. I don't know if you've seen that, but that'd be a classic example of that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And they've got the layout, they've got plans, everything. And even some of the foundations are still there. Everything's laid out really, really well, and it's been done in a really great way.
Yeah. Oh, excellent.
Cowra would be well worth a visit if you've over that way.
Yeah. Oh, good. I mean, the only light that we've got is the Department of Veterans Affairs gave us a salute their service grant of around about $4,000 or $5,000, so that I can write a small 24, 25-page book on the Chidlow Camp 4, just on that particular camp. But that's a start. I mean, what I'd like to see is a book being written about each of the camps, so people can read it and learn, what battalions were there and where their grandfather was or their father, whatever. Yes, yes.
Well, when you mentioned that the biggest camp, how big was the one up in Moora? Or were they all independent?
Yeah, they were pretty, and I do a lot of work up there, and I do work with the Moore Historical Society up there as well. Yeah, they were mainly battalion camps, about 1,000 men in each camp, so it wasn't concentrated like this camp was. Yeah, but yeah, I find that history fascinating. 20,000 troops in the Midwest, radar stations up and down our coast, coastal observation posts every 20 miles, and I'm just doing the research for that, and proposed Japanese landings, torpedoes found on the beach near Jurien Bay. I mean, there's all sorts of, there's that hidden history of that military history that people just don't know about. And it seems to skip a generation, unfortunately, this history, and you think too late. I wish I had to talk to my dad about his time in the Midwest. We all do that.
Another one that sounds like what you've been mentioning is that 10th Light Horse Trail out of Wanneroo.
Yeah.
How long's that going to last?
That's right. And if you look at, where was the other big camp in the Hills region? Bushmead. Bushmead was the first World War II military camp. The major camp for the women's Australian Army forces. That was their base. It was the base for the Special Mobile Force. Demolished, the whole lot. No heritage survey done. All subdivided. And you go back through, and they give the Bushmead Army Camp with this original World War II rifle range, the whole lot, the huts that were still there. They give it 3 or 4 lines in a heritage survey. Oh, we believe there was some military equipment here in World War II, but it's no longer an extent. Subdivide, recommendation. And the thing is, if it's not in the municipal inventory, it doesn't exist, because nobody will get up out of their office and go out to Chidlow and have a look through the bush. They don't want to, because they'll do a desktop survey. First thing you do, municipal inventory, Office of State Heritage, not mentioned either, it doesn't exist. There is no heritage. There is no army camp. There is no army camp at Chidlow. There isn't. It's just, no, it doesn't exist.
Can any Joe Blow go up there and have a look around?
Yes, of course you can. No, of course you can. And I'd encourage you to. And if anybody wants to know where to go, just give me a ring. Get my business card over there, and maybe I'll run another guided tour out there. Oh man, it's just fascinating. You walk around out there and you go, wow, look at this. I mean, it's no tall structures, but the concrete slabs are there, and the drains and the slit trenches. And
Have you had much of a look out at the other camps, 1, 2 and 3?
I've been concentrating pretty much on, because the developers have done the right thing. They've said, okay, we're going to destroy this. Bob, you take your team in there, you do whatever you like. They've just said go for it. No restrictions. Dig up what you want, salvage whatever you can, record whatever you can. And that's gradually being destroyed. Most of the trees are gone now. Most of it's been mulched. The roads and the fences and the building lot pads and everything are all sort of starting to go in. So I've just concentrated all my spare time in trying to do that. I've been out and had one look at the other camps, and I just go, oh wow, wouldn't I love to come out here and spend some time? But that's not under immediate threat. I think it's under a long-term threat, because I think it'll be, the developers are eyeing it off right now, I would think. But Camp 4 is gone. Half of Camp 4 is gone. And the developers have been very, very good about that. And they're actually we're going to have another meeting with them shortly, and they're going to try and do things like name some of the streets after some of the soldiers that were there. They're doing their best. They've done nothing illegal in what they've done. They followed the process, and they got the approval.
So, showing my ignorance, it was a reserve. Who can buy a reserve?
Well, yeah, there you go. I mean, that's, and I sent a letter to the WA Planning Commission and the Office of State Heritage, and I said, can you please provide me with the details of the transaction? Well, none have been forthcoming.
So you don't know who's bought it, who's the developer?
Yeah, look, I know I have contacts within that, but I don't know what the deal of the transaction, how the you wouldn't think that public reserve could be sold.
Probably bought the government.
Yeah, that's right.
It would normally go up for tender, I would imagine.
Yeah.
The highest tender would get it. You wouldn't just sell it to somebody as, oh, well, you look good to me today. So,
Yeah, I think one of the blocks was water court. One of the
Yes.
the blocks was water court, and others, some were private, because I was not involved, but went to the
Yeah.
unfortunately. I think it was pretty sealed and done by that stage, and we were very, there was nothing we could do.
Yeah, look, it's all over. For that part of the camp, it's all over. We can't worry about it. I've just put that one on the boat, sailed that one off, doing my best. But now we've just got to make sure we protect the rest of them. And you know, and we need your help. You know, follow the Friends of the Chidlow WWII Camps Facebook page, you know, like it, whatever. Sometimes we get, that goes to 17,000 people on some occasions. We do a post and it goes to 17,000 people and you go, wow. You know, we get a huge response. You know, start giving your, you know, local shire representatives a hard time about this. Say, hang on, why aren't we looking after this? It's a no-brainer. I mean, it's public reserve. Just get it on the list.